of you have probably heard something similar. I speak with probably each year hundreds of people coming out of the church. And when they're thinking about what's next in their life, many of them tell me straight off the bat that I'm not interested in the Noahide. I'm not interested in being a Noahide. And I ask them why. And they say because they've looked into the idea of being a Noahide, and it seems to them that it's very underwhelming. It seems to them that that's all there is. Don't steal, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't blaspheme, and that's it. And they feel that this path is very unsubstantial. Where's the meat? What's the old commercial we used to hear? Where's the beef?
Where's the beef?
Where's the beef?
And so that's, I think, for many people, their concern. Like I'm leaving, a rich, might be idolatry, but I'm leaving a rich, historical, spiritual path that had plenty of bells and whistles, and I'm going to go into this where it's just about not stealing and killing and blaspheming and committing adultery. Of course, they don't realize that they're only looking at the very tip of the iceberg. In reality, we all know that there are more than just 7 laws. At the end of the day, we know that each of the laws themselves is extremely complex. It's not as if you could just they show up on the first day, and they say to their boss the following: "It's great to meet you. I just want you to know that I am willing and prepared to do everything that's written in my job contract. Everything I'm willing to do if it's spelled out in the contract. Don't even dream about asking me to come in 1 minute before 9 o'clock in the morning. Don't even think about having me stay 1 minute past 5. Don't even dream about having me do anything that's not explicitly spelled out in my job contract." What kind of a way to deal with your boss is that? Or if a husband comes home after the wedding and says, "Dear, I love you very much. I'm willing to do everything that's spelled out in our marriage contract. Don't even think about asking me to do anything that's not written down in the marriage contract." Those are recipes for disaster. So built in within the Torah, within law, is the idea of, if you care anything about it, to go beyond the letter of the law. And then, of course, there's a fine-tuning of every single one of the commandments. For example, murder in the Talmud is called shfichat damim, the spilling of blood. So the Talmud says that if you embarrass someone in public, it's like you murdered them. So very few people that I know ever killed anyone. But many people embarrass people in public. And when you embarrass them, you spill their blood. Their face turns red. Or you drain the color out of them. They turn white. So when we think about these laws, it's not so simple that, what's the big deal? Don't kill anyone. There's a fine-tuning level to each of the laws. Stealing, for example. Fine. Very few of us probably ever broke into a bank and held it up at gunpoint. I assume. But there's an idea, for example, of gezel shena, of making a little bit too much noise and waking someone up. You're stealing their sleep. That's a form of theft. Or geneva dat, that you steal someone's mind if you mislead them. if you give them the wrong impression. These are the kind of quote-unquote white-collar crimes that people do routinely. So it's not as if the Noahide path is just simply don't commit these horrible, terrible crimes that most of us would never possibly commit in 10 lifetimes. Or, if you don't return a greeting to someone greets you and says, "Hi, good morning, how are you?" and you ignore them, that's considered stealing. You've stolen their blessing. You've stolen their greeting. So once we become sensitized to the fact that the laws themselves are complex, there are different levels, there's fine-tuning, there's going beyond the letter of the law, the Noahide path is not so insubstantial. And when I started holding Noahide meetings in Toronto about 20 years ago, I spoke with a few rabbis just to get their view on what we should cover at these meetings. What should we do at these meetings? And a number of them advised me that you should work on tikkun hamidot, on the perfection of character traits. That's what you should focus on. Now, why is this something that is so relevant to B'nai Noach, to Noahides? So Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin, one of the great Hasidic masters, he passed away in the year 1900. He teaches, and it's an old teaching by others as well, that the first time a word appears in the Torah, that's the headquarters of that word. You want to know what a kiss is? Find the first time you see that word in the Torah. And the first time something happens in the Torah is the headquarters of that thing as well. So what is the first question in the Torah? So I'll tell you in a story what the first question is. In 1798, for Shner Zalman of Liadi, who was the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, he was the founder of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, he was denounced by his opponents. Back then, religion was a contact sport, and so he was denounced to the government, and he was imprisoned in St. Petersburg. So the jailer that was watching him was very impressed by this prisoner. Here's a person that is obviously very pious, very holy. He's spending his whole day praying and meditating and studying. And they say that there were miracles that happened in the jail cell, that the mice would carry his slippers to him. Don't ask what must have been going on in this jail cell. So one day the guard approached the rabbi. And he said, "You know, Rabbi, I see you're a very studious person. It's very wonderful. And I also read the Bible a lot. I'm also very interested in the Bible. So can I ask you a question?" So the rabbi says, "Please ask." And he says, "Well, in the Garden of Eden, after Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they saw they were naked, what did they do? They went and they hid. And God calls out, 'Where are you?' So the jailer asks the Rebbe, 'I don't understand. God created the entire universe. God can do anything. God knows everything. So why does God have to ask them, 'Where are you?' He must have known exactly where they were." So the Rebbe said, "You know, that's a very good question. It's a very good question." And he told the jailer, "I want you to know that Adam and Eve really, they are every man. Adam and Eve represent all of us, all human beings who will ever live. And God is constantly asking each one of us, 'Where are you?'" It wasn't only a question that God asked to Adam and Eve. This is the first question in the Bible. This is the ultimate question. And as the ultimate question, it's the question that God asks each of us all the time. Where are you? God is asking us, where are you in your life? Because I created you for a purpose. How far have you come on your journey? You're supposed to get somewhere in life. Where are you? So we see from this little story that thinking about who we are as people how far we've come in life, is a central question. And we see this as well in the passage that Chashi quoted earlier today. We see in the creation of human beings that God says, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. And the $64,000 question is, who's God speaking to? Let us make man. And there are a number of approaches that have been suggested. But Rashi mentioned the approach of the Baal Shem Tov and the Hasidic masters, that God is really speaking to every human being who will ever live. God is speaking to you, and God is speaking to people who live 1,000 years from now, and God is speaking to people who lived 500 years ago. And God is basically saying the following. Everything else I created unilaterally. When God created the world, he simply said, let there be. Let there be trees, let there be elephants, let there be frogs. That's how God created everything. All he had to do was say, let it be. But God is saying to the human being, I can't do that for a human being. I cannot create a fully formed human being. God says, I can give you the raw ingredients. I can give you a body and a soul. But who you will become is a function of what you do with those raw ingredients. And that's why God beckons to every single human being who will ever live and says, let us make man. Meaning, we have to be involved in this together, God says. I can't do it for you. And so basically, this is the source of the idea that we are here to create ourselves. We are here to make something of ourselves. And this is the idea that all human beings, as Rabbi Poston said yesterday, according to the Gaon of Vilna, the whole purpose of our being in this world is to perfect our character traits. So where do you see this idea from? You see it from the very beginning of the Bible, that each of us is on a journey, and God is asking each of us, how far have you come? How far have you progressed? And it's the idea that we are not created fully formed. Each one of us has to create ourselves. We see this in a number of very interesting ways. The Maharal from Prague, a famous mystic in the 16th century, says that why is the first person called Adam? Adam, the Bible says, because Adam comes from the Adamah. Adamah is the earth. So what's the earth? So the truth is, the earth is pure potential. You could have a plot of earth, and if you take care of it, and you plow it, and you clean it, and you water it, and you fertilize it, and you do all the things that you need to make sure that things will grow, you can have a very productive plot of earth that will produce beautiful plants or trees or flowers. But if you neglect that earth and you don't take care of it properly, you're going to get weeds and nothing is going to happen. And so the earth is pure potential, and the human being that comes from the Adamah, Adam, is pure potential. And the big question is, what are we going to do with that potential? And that's why, according to Yosef Albo, one of the great philosophers, medieval philosophers, he says that's why in the creation story of human beings, it doesn't say, and God saw that it was good after the human being was created. After everything else is created, God says, it's good, meaning this is exactly how it is supposed to be. But God doesn't say that for the human being because we didn't come out exactly as we're supposed to be. This is something that we have to work on. We have to bring ourselves to that point where we can reach our potential. And that's why Rabbi David Aaron from Jerusalem says, we are not human beings, we are human becomings. That's who we are. And when people ask me, sometimes I don't know why people ask me this question, they want to know what my denomination is, what kind of Jewish denomination you're part of. I often jokingly say, under constructionism. That's my denomination.
That's a good one.
Under constructionism.
That's a good one.
So the point is that each one of us is here, whether we're Jew or non-Jew. We're all here for the same purpose. We're here to create a masterpiece. And part of that, a large part of that, is perfecting our character traits. Moving from selfish to generous. Moving from arrogant to humble. From lazy to industrious. From angry to patient. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of character traits. And they're very hard to change, as we all know. Rabbi Salanter, the founder of the Musar movement, famously said, it's easier to master the entire Babylonian Talmud. If you do one page a day, it takes you 7.5 years. It's easier to master the entire Babylonian Talmud than to change one character trait about yourself. So with this massive lifetime assignment, lifetime curriculum, if you will, there is plenty to keep Noahides busy and involved continuously for their entire life. Noahide cannot say, what is the big deal as a Noahide? I'm not going to kill anyone, I'm not going to steal, I won't commit adultery. It's a lot more than that to be concerned about and to be working on and to practice. It's not just an intellectual exercise of reading a few books or watching a few videos. This requires practice and work, and it's hard work. And that is the spiritual life of the Noahide to a great extent. We often get very caught up with, am I allowed to put a mezuzah on my door? Am I allowed to do this? Can I do that? They're not trivial questions. But at the end of the day, having a mezuzah on your door may not be as important for your spiritual development as working on your patience or your generosity or being someone that's more grateful. That's where the rubber hits the road in terms of spirituality. I'd like to spend the time that we have now together focusing on one trait, on one issue. But before getting into it, I want to explain why I chose this topic. And it's the result of two recent incidents that I experienced in that cesspool called the internet. So number one. So I am somewhat active in social media, especially on Facebook, and I try every day to post some Torah thought to about 30 Facebook groups I belong to. And I noticed that one Noahide group, I'm involved with probably half a dozen or so, maybe more, Noahide groups, and there was one group that I noticed was not posting anything that I submitted. Nothing went on. So I finally just was curious, like, what's going on? And I contacted one of the administrators of the site, and they told me that no, what you're posting is just for Jews. That this is not something that applies to Noahides. These are passages in the Bible that's not directed towards Noahides. And so we don't accept that kind of material, and we're not posting your posts. My view,
gotta be nog.
I don't think it's so radical, is that even if a particular Torah teaching was not originally directed specifically towards Noahides, that doesn't mean that there's nothing about that teaching that Noahides are not able to learn from, or gain inspiration from, or get some guidance from.
Exactly.
I think that if you just apply yourself a little bit, virtually everything in the Torah can have some application and message and significance and relevance to Bnei Noah. But I found their attitude a little bit, let's say, inflexible.
Yep.
And tinged with a little bit of condescension or hostility when I raised the question. Now, we know that there are a number of different Noahide organizations in the world today. Thank God, there are a number of different groups that are working with Noahides. Unfortunately, there is very little coordination or cooperation between all the different groups that are working with Bnei Noah. It reminds me of a story that Moshe Waldox would always tell about, I think it's an apocryphal story, but you'll get the point. He would tell a story of this rowing competition that would take place on the Charles River in Boston. And he said that he saw one year he was down by the Charles River, and he sees, he's a little surprised, that there's an entry, there's a team, a collegiate team from Yeshiva University. They're competing. Usually it's the Ivy League schools that are rowing. Here's Yeshiva University, a bunch of 6 guys with keyboards, and they're rowing, and they come in last place by a very, very far distance. And anyway, the next year, the same thing. They come in last place. They're miles behind everyone else. This is going on year after year after year. So finally, he says to the coach, he says, you know what? Maybe what you should do is go like to Yale or Harvard and see like when they're practicing how they do it. Maybe you can learn something. So the next year, he sees the coach from Yeshiva University, and the coach says, you know, you were right. I went to see how they do it, and you know what? When the rowing teams from Yale and Harvard are practicing, there's one guy that's yelling and 6 guys that are rowing. We're the opposite, right? We had one guy that was rowing and 6 guys that were yelling and screaming.
Oh, my.
It's confusing. No wonder. Yeesh.
So sometimes in this large world of, again, well-meaning organizations that are working with Bnei Noah, not only is there often a lack of cooperation and coordination, there are sometimes unfortunate conflicts. And I recently saw, and I was bothered by it, a very nasty argument between 2 people online. One of them happens to be a member of my Noahide group in Toronto. And he was involved in a horrible, I thought ugly argument with someone else about which Noahide guidebook they follow. I follow this one, and you follow this one, and they begin arguing which one is more legitimate, which one has more support from other rabbis, and it got very ugly, very personal, and very nasty.
Been there.
It was like one of these ugly, my pop is greater than your pop arguments you had when you were a kid. So with this as an introduction, what I'd like to speak about for the remaining time is the topic of tolerance. Now, the Talmud tells us that the Second Temple was destroyed not because the people back then were murderers or idolaters or rapists. They weren't horrible sinners. They were basically people who observed the Torah. They looked like, on the outside, religious Jews. But the Talmud says that the temple was destroyed because these people just didn't get along with each other. They didn't get along with each other. They even hated each other sometimes. One of the great commentaries, modern biblical commentaries, is by Rabbi Naftali Tzvi of Berlin, the Netziv. And his introduction to the book of Genesis, he basically says that in the times of the Second Temple, people didn't tolerate those with other views, and they would label them as heretics. And that climate led to the destruction of Jerusalem. I'll quote for you what he says. He says, they were righteous, and they were pious, and they toiled in the Torah, but they were not diplomatic or tolerant. And because of the hatred in their hearts for one another, they suspected anyone who conducted their religious life not in accordance with their view as being a Sadducee or a heretic. As a result, they came to horrible bloodshed and every known evil until the temple was destroyed. And this vindicated what God did to them, destroying the temple. Since God is upright, he does not tolerate such quote-unquote righteous people unless they are also diplomatic and tolerant and not crooked. And even if they act for the sake of heaven, because this causes the destruction of creation and the ruin of society. You can be the holiest roller in the world, but if you're not a decent, tolerant, diplomatic person, you're really going in the wrong direction. The Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Goldberg quoted earlier today, published the following letter expressing his frustration about this kind of vituperative fighting between factions. He said, "I must speak out my heart about the manner of conflict taking place among the Jewish people. One camp publicizes its views in the newspapers with the signatures of all of its backers. The other side does the same. One of them wrote, quote, 'The one with the most signatures wins.' And I say, the one with the most signatures is creating unnecessary conflict in Israel. All of Israel is burning like a fire as each side places more and more ads condemning their opposition. Even the Holy Land of Israel is becoming a subject of controversy. I don't know who permitted all of these terrible sins. Everyone is sure that he is saying the truth, and it's the other opinion that's creating the argument. This is a grave error, because even if both are right, they have no right to violate the Torah. So many commandments are being violated. No good can possibly come out of this. Right or wrong, they're creating a desecration of God's name. 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died in 1 month. Not because they argued, but because they argued improperly, and they caused a desecration of God's name. Certainly each one of these giants felt that he was right. So what is our challenge? And I think this is relevant not just to Jews, but to Bnei Noach as well. How do we relate to those with whom we differ? We don't all fall on the same page in this life. How do we live in unity even when disagreeing? How do we stand up for our beliefs, yet respect those who disagree with us? What's interesting is the Torah seems to assume axiomatically that people are different, and that that's a positive thing. It's good that we're not all exactly the same. The Netziv, who I quoted earlier, he discussed why the temple was destroyed. So he also writes about the sin of the Tower of Babel. And he says that when you read the Torah, what does it say about them? They were of Dvarim Achadim, which means they were of singular words. And he understands that to mean that they were of one mind, and that they didn't tolerate differences. Everyone had to be the same. Everyone had to toe the same party line. So what did God do? God multiplied their languages, scattering them and restoring diversity. That was the sin, among other things. But that's what we're supposed to have. A world where we're not all homogenized and the same. It's not healthy for everyone to have exactly the same thoughts. Talmud says, in Tractate Brachot 58a, that just like all our faces are different, so too all of our ideas are different. People are different, and that's the way the world is supposed to be. The Holy Kotzker Rebbe used to say, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I and you are not you. But if you are you because you are you, and I am I because I am I, then I am I and you are you. Is that clear?
Crystal.
We say in our prayers as a Jewish community, when we begin our daily silent meditation, we talk about the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. Why didn't we just say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why do we have to expand this? The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And the commentaries explain because there wasn't a one-size-fits God for all of them. Each one of these patriarchs carved out their own personal relationship with God. And so it was the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. They didn't have the exact same approach to God, each one of them. The Midrash teaches us that when the Jews crossed the Yam Suf, Sea of Reeds, there wasn't one lane that they all marched through. The Midrash says there were 12 lanes that opened up. So we don't have only one approach in Judaism. And I would say the same idea applies to the Noahide world. You don't have to have only one flavor, only one approach. We don't have to be all homogenized. It's healthy that way. The Zohar teaches that there's Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are 70 faces to the Torah. We're not all the same. We don't all have the same face. The Talmud says in Tractate Eruvin 13b that the schools of Hillel and Shammai argued for many years. They were disputing and arguing and debating until a bat kol, a divine heavenly voice, came down and announced, after all their arguing, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. These and these are both the words of the living God. It's not one was right and one was wrong. There's truth to both of these approaches. And this is a very radical idea if you think about it. An extremely radical idea that mutually exclusive ideas can both be right. It's hard to even fathom that. But that's the Torah approach. Torah approach is that it's not always just right and wrong. Two different views can both be right. Yet, it's interesting. The law is decided when we have to make a decision. We follow the school of Hillel. Why do we follow the school of Hillel? Because the Talmud says they were humble, gentle, and tolerant. And they taught their own views. They would explain their own point of view. But they would teach those of Beit Shammai, their opponents, and even expressed the views of the school of Shammai before their own view. Meaning they would give precedence to expressing the view of their opponents. They would take the people they disagreed with seriously. And they were considerate of the opposing point of view. And that's why the Talmud says that we will follow the rulings of the school of Hillel. The Talmud says in Tractate Brachot 9b, Talmud asks, when are we allowed to say the Shema in the morning? Right? Stay 3 paragraphs in the Torah. The first one, Hear, O Israel, Hashem our God, Hashem is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and all your soul, and all your mind, etc. So when can you start saying it? It's the morning Shema. So when is the first time? When is the earliest that you're allowed to say it? So the Talmud says when you can see someone from a distance of 4 cubits and recognize them. So it means that you're out, and it may be quite dark outside, but if it's light enough that you can tell that that's Bob and not Bill, then it's okay, it's light enough for you to be able to say the Shema. But Rabbi Saul Weiss explained very beautifully on a more symbolic level, what does this mean? That when you can recognize someone from 4 cubits away, that's when you can say the Shema. He said, when are you able to have a relationship with God? That's what the Shema is all about. You're expressing your fidelity to God. He said, when can you be considered someone who is genuinely spiritual and can have a relationship with God? It's when you can see someone who's not within your, we call in Hebrew, Dalet Amot. We speak about like your own little area, your space, your personal space, as being a space of 4 cubits. So the Talmud is saying, when you're able to see someone who's not within your little world, not someone just like yourself, and still recognize their philosophy and their approach as legitimate, that's what it means on the symbolic level. When you can see someone and acknowledge them, right? When you see someone, you acknowledge them and give them credibility and legitimacy, even though they're not in your camp, they're not within your little sphere, that's when you can say the Shema. The Midrash teaches the following. When the world was being created, and the Holy One, blessed be He, came to create Adam, the ministering angels formed themselves into groups and parties, some of them saying, let man be created, while others urged, let him not be created. It's a big fight going on among the angels. Should we create human beings, not create human beings. So love, the angel representing love, said, let him be created because he will dispense acts of love. Human beings can be very loving creatures. Truth said, let him not be created because he is compounded of falsehood. Human beings are very fond of misleading people, of telling false news and fake news and lying and the deception. So truth said you can't create these people. They're not going to be truthful. Righteousness said, let him be created because he'll perform righteous deeds. But peace said, let him not be created because he is full of strife. And human beings are always fighting with each other. So you have a 2-to-2 tie. Two angels saying that you should create human beings. Two angels saying, no, don't create human beings. So what did God do? He took the angel of truth and he cast it to the ground. Took truth and he cast it to the ground. And now it's 2 against 1. Now there are 2 angels saying create and only 1 angel saying not to create. And so that's why the 2 angels saying create win. But the angels protested to God. And they said to God, Holy One, blessed be he, sovereign of the universe. Why did you despise your seal? Because the Torah says that the seal of God is truth. Right? The signet ring. When you would take a ring and stamp a letter, that you're giving your credibility to that letter, so that the Torah says that the signet ring of God, the seal of God, is truth. And the angels are saying, how could you have taken your seal, your signet ring, and you cast it down to the earth? And God says, let truth arise from the earth. Quoting the verse in Psalms chapter 85, verse 12, let truth spring up from the earth. But you see that God wanted to create the world. And in order to have a world of peace, sometimes you have to compromise when it comes to truth. There are times when the Torah says you shouldn't be 1,000% truthful. When it comes to peace, you can shade the truth. If you're always insisting on telling the truth and being bluntly honest, there are times when it's not called for. Is a doctor always supposed to tell the patient exactly what their chances are of living? Not that the doctor knows. The doctor thinks that they know. And Rabbi Cardozo explains this midrash as follows. He says that by throwing truth down to the ground, God broke it into many pieces. Just as white light refracts into many colors, truth broke into many facets. The facets appear mutually exclusive, like different colors of the spectrum. But in reality, they're not mutually exclusive. They each reveal one hue of the original light. Right, Moshe Feinstein, the great halachic authority of the 20th century, said that the Torah is incredibly complex. Probing almost any issue, he said, will yield disagreements. And Rabbi Feinstein said that this itself reflects the divine wisdom beyond full human comprehension. He said it's precisely the debates and the arguments that expresses the fullness of the Torah. The idea that we have to somehow homogenize everything and get rid of all the disagreements does not do justice to the Torah. We have to appreciate the incredible diversity that's built into the Torah itself. There's a wonderful illustration of this idea in a story that involved Rabbi Soloveitchik from Yeshiva University and one of the rabbis in the 1940s, Rabbi Shusai. So in this story, what happened is, it wasn't easy back then to be a rabbi. There weren't many jobs for rabbis in the 1940s. And he needed to raise some money for his family, and he needed to take a job during the high holidays. So he asked Rabbi Soloveitchik to help him get a position. Rabbi Soloveitchik was the head of all of Yeshiva University, and he had plenty of contacts throughout North America. Maybe you can get me a job for the high holidays to be the rabbi of a synagogue that didn't have a rabbi. And Rabbi Soloveitchik asked him the following question. Would you accept a shul without a mechitza, a division between the men and the women? Or do you only want a shul with a mechitza? And Rabbi Shushan was shocked by this question, because he knew that Rabbi Soloveitchik himself held that it was forbidden to pray in a synagogue that didn't have a mechitza dividing the men and the women. And Rabbi Soloveitchik famously said, it would be better to stay home and pray by yourself on the holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur, than to pray in a synagogue without a mechitza. And yet Rabbi Soloveitchik is asking him, would you be okay taking the job at a synagogue without a mechitza? Now, in the 1940s, it was just very, very hard to find a position in a synagogue without a mechitza that paid less money than the few synagogues that had a mechitza. Rabbi Soloveitchik knew that there were other opinions that disagreed with him. He knew that there were views that said that you could, if you had to, pray in a synagogue that didn't have such a mechitza. And he didn't want to impose his personal views upon his student. He wanted to give his student a full range of opinions, even though he doesn't accept those opinions. He held them out as options for his student. Rabbi Soloveitchik demonstrated an appreciation of the idea that there's a range of views, and he had the flexibility not to insist that everyone else follow his approach. One of the great Hasidic masters was the Abda Rebbe, Yeshua Heschel, Avraham Yeshua Heschel of Apt. And he wrote a famous book. His book of sermons is called the Noahide Yisrael, the one who loves Israel. And he used to tell his students that in every weekly Torah portion, whatever Torah portion in the year that you come to, there's a lesson in that Torah portion about peace. About peace. So his students said to him, they said, Rebbe, this Shabbat is going to be the Torah portion of Balak. Of Balak. The whole story of Balak hiring, the sorcerer to curse the Jews. It's Bilam to go. But they were wondering, where in this Torah portion do you see So the Abda Rebbe said to them, what are you talking about? Where do you see there's peace in this chapter? It's in the very name of the chapter. Look at the name, Balak. Spelled Bet, Lamed, Kuf. Said it stands for the Hebrew words, Ve'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha. You shall love your fellow as yourself. There's no better lesson than that. And his students couldn't believe it. They said, what are you talking about? Ve'ahavta is spelled with a vav. Balak is spelled with a bet. And the bet can have a V sound when there's no dot in the middle, but it's a different letter. And kamocha is spelled with a chaf, and Balak is spelled with a kuf. So you can't compare those words. And the Rebbe said to his students, you don't get it. If you insist that everything has to be 1,000% perfect, you're never going to have peace in the world. That's why this is the cue for the peace lesson in the Torah portion of Balak. Now the Talmud teaches that when we finish praying, there's a custom that you take 3 steps backward. Usually the custom is when you're about to pray to God, it's like you're approaching the king. You take 3 steps forward in approaching the king. When you finish praying, you take 3 steps backward. And as we take the 3 steps backward, we bow to the left, we bow to the right, we bow to the center, and we say the verse, Oseh Shalom B'Mamav, Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'Yivru Amen, the one who makes peace in the heavens, may he make peace on us and on all of Israel. Rabbi Moshe Sherer used to say that we take 3 steps backwards when we say this line, because in order to have peace, it's a blessing for peace. In order to have peace, you sometimes position, your own rigid insistence that only your position is right, and not that you cling to your stubborn point of view. The Talmud teaches in Tractate Brachot. Now you have to sort of give me all your marbles now, because this is going to be a difficult lesson, but it's amazing. The Talmud teaches in Tractate Brachot that the angels complained. Imagine the angels coming to God. They're up in heaven. Where's the complaint department? And they say to God, we don't understand. In your holy Torah, it is written that you, God, will not show favor nor take bribes. That your own Torah says that. You will not show favor or take bribes. And yet they said, but you show favor to the Jews. What's going on, the angels say. And God replies to the angels, are the Jews not worthy that I show them favor? Why? Because in my Torah I have written, and when you have eaten and are satiated, you shall bless the Lord your God. Meaning in the Torah, when do you have to thank God for having eaten? Only when you're satiated, when you're full. And then, yet, God says, nevertheless, they adopted, the Jews, the stringency of reciting the grace after meals after eating an amount equivalent to either an olive size or an egg size. No one's full from that. So God says to the angels, how can I not show them favor if that's how they're acting? Now it's hard to understand that. Why should that make God show us favor? So I saw an amazing explanation for this by Rabbi Ornstein. He says that when you look further in the Talmud, it asks the question, how much do you have to eat in order to make a quorum to praise God together? There's a custom not only of an individual thanking God for their food, but when you have a group of people, it's worthy for the group to get together and for one person to lead the group in praising God. So usually you need to have 3 people at least, and then there are larger groups, but the question is, how much does each person have to eat in order to combine together to form a quorum, a group that will praise God together? So there's a dispute about this. There's a dispute. Or a mayor said an olive's volume. They have to have a volume of an olive of food. They have that much, they can join together and praise God as a group. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it has to be the size of an egg. So what was amazing was that when the students sat down, students from both of these great teachers, when they sat down to eat, they would agree ahead of time to eat either less than an olive's volume of food, or that they would all have more than an egg's volume of food, so that according to both opinions, that according to whatever opinion you hold, they would either not have to join together, because all of them are eating less than an olive, or they would all have to join together as a group because they were all having more than an egg. So since they showed consideration toward the other, and they worked together in order to all get along, how could Hashem not do so for us? It would seem that in order to merit Hashem's favor, we have to be considerate and respectful of the approaches of those different from ourselves. Now, all of that I've discussed so far, you say could apply to people who are basically in the Torah camp with you. Meaning, basically, we've been talking about people that are similarly observant of the Torah, but you have different views of exactly how to practice. But then there's another kind of disagreement, and that's with people who seem to be, at least, outside the pale. Jews that are not necessarily observant. So how do you relate to them? So in the book of Leviticus, there's a principle called tochacha, giving rebuke. And you find this in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17, where it says, don't hate your brother in your heart, you shall surely rebuke your neighbor. Now, the word surely in Hebrew is basically just the Hebrew repeating itself. The Hebrew says, Ocheach tochiach. So it could have just said, Ocheach, or just use the word once, and that would mean you shall rebuke. When it repeats the word, Ocheach tochiach, in English we say, you shall surely rebuke your neighbor. And then it says, and don't bear sin because of him. So there's a commandment to, when necessary, rebuke people, but don't bear sin because of him. So both two things are meant. Number one, you're responsible for your neighbor. And if you don't correct them, you bear a certain amount of responsibility for what they're doing that's wrong. On the other hand, some of the commentaries explain that it's telling you how to rebuke people. Meaning, don't rebuke them in such a way that you will bear sin. Meaning that don't embarrass them. Because there, in rebuking them, you're going to yourself commit a sin. So Noahide, the famous biblical philosopher, commentary to the Bible, says that when you rebuke your neighbor, you're entering into a dialogue with him. Maybe you don't understand their point of view. I mean, maybe to you it seems like they're horrible sinners. But maybe you don't really get them. And maybe they'll be able to explain their point of view to you. Maybe you'll be able to convince them that they are wrong. But by entering into a dialogue, you'll begin to understand them and not come to hate them. But if you don't give them an opportunity to explain themselves, you may come to hate them. That's how he understands the commandment to rebuke. Now the Sfas Emes, great Hasidic commentary that I referred to yesterday, he wants to know, why does the Torah double up this word, Ocheach tochiach, you shall surely rebuke? Why does it say the word rebuke twice? So he says something amazing. He says, because you as well, if you see someone that's doing something that's wrong, you as well deserve some of the rebuke. Because if someone is doing the wrong thing, you bear some responsibility. Who sets the moral climate in the nation? So we have to include ourselves in the rebuke. Maimonides explains that sometimes rebuke doesn't apply. So when he writes about the Karaites, these are the people that rejected the oral Torah, he says that they stand outside the camp, and you don't engage with them, and they are to be shunned. That's how Maimonides writes about the Karaites. But what about the children of the Karaites? What about the children of those who rebelled against Judaism? Rebuking them will not help. You'll just push them further away. And the truth is that they're not villains, they're victims. They were raised like this. They don't know any better. So Maimonides says, since they don't know any better, you have to reach out to them with love. That is the guidance of Maimonides. And the Balatanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, he writes that rebuke applies only to those who are in your camp, who you share values with. For those not in your camp, you cannot rebuke them. The commandment there is to love them. And this is actually reflected in the story of his major teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, was once approached by a broken-hearted father. The father was weeping and crying to the Baal Shem Tov that my son has left Judaism. He's an atheist. He's no longer following anything in the Torah. What do I do? And the Baal Shem Tov says to him, you have to love him even more. That's what you do with some people. Now, there's an incredible teaching from another Hasidic master, the Mei HaShiloach, the Rebbe from Ishbitz. And when he looks at the Ten Commandments, the first one he finds to be a little bit peculiar. Because the first of the Ten Commandments says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem, your God. But the question is, what is the normal Hebrew word for I? Ani. The way you normally say I is Ani. This word Anochi it's a strange form. It's not normal. The word Anochi is really the word Ani, with what we call in Hebrew the Chaf Hadinyon, the letter Chaf, which is the letter of similitude, meaning that when you have this letter Chaf, it tells you that A is like B. That's the word Anochi. And he explains that what God is saying to us is quite amazing. God is saying at Mount Sinai, not Ani Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God. He's saying Anochi, meaning I'm not revealing exactly who I am to you. This is sort of like who I am. That's Anochi. It's in modern Hebrew we say Ke'ilu. It's as if. It's like. It's like. What you're receiving is not me in my essence. It's not me in my entirety. That you're not getting. Obviously, because human beings cannot really grasp God. So God is saying to us at Mount Sinai, you're not really getting a full view, so to speak, of me. And our knowledge of God is not perfect. We don't have a perfect knowledge of God. And therefore, it says right afterward, the next commandment says, don't make graven images. What does that mean? It means that things are not cut and dry. When you have a graven image, you're making very clear lines of demarcation. And when God says, this is like sort of who I am, and don't make graven images, what God is saying is, we don't have clarity, total clarity about who God is, and therefore you can't put him in a box. You can't put God in a box. And therefore, you have to have a little bit of humility in terms of how certain we are and how dogmatic we are about our beliefs. We should believe things, but we should have a little bit of humility and uncertainty. And this should lead to humility in general. Yitz Greenberg used to say, I think tongue-in-cheek, he would say, I don't care which Jewish denomination you associate with, as long as you're embarrassed by it. Meaning that every person should, realize that there are things about their own canon that are not perfect. So whatever group you belong to, fine. But don't become a rah-rah airhead that's not able to see clearly where you are. Right. Everyone needs improvement. No one is perfect. No one has all the answers. No one has the total truth. So don't be so quick to dismiss and judge others. The truth is we have to be very patient with other people. Very patient with other people. I want to tell you now my favorite story. I tell this frequently. And it's about a time in Russia where there was a lot of corruption. And there was a particular town where the mayor, and the mayor was not just the mayor was the mayor and the tax collector and the judge and the jury and the executioner and the bailiff, and he ran the jail, did everything. And this fellow was collecting taxes from the Jewish people in this city for many, many, many years, but he was keeping it to himself. He didn't send a penny back to St. Petersburg. So after 25, 30 years of doing this, he gets a letter from the government. And they say, you owe us like 30,000 rubles, back taxes. So this guy is going crazy. 30,000 rubles is a fortune. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I don't have 30,000 rubles. Whatever I stole, I spent a long time ago. So he did back then the simplest thing. He would just grab the first Jew he saw on the street and hold him for ransom. So who did he grab? There was a young man in this town that was an orphan, a young boy that was raised, he had no parents, and he was basically raised as a ward of the city. The whole city raised him, and he just recently, the week before, got engaged to get married. And that's the poor fellow that this miserable mayor grabs off the street. And he says to the town, you want the boy back? I need 30,000 rubles. So the town has a meeting, and everyone is crying, and they're weeping, because no one has any money in this town. And they start collecting a few pennies, they have nothing. And they don't know what to do. We don't have any money, we don't have any way of getting money, we have no way of dealing with this crisis. Anyway, they're all basically giving up, and they're freaking out, and they don't know what to do. And into the meeting walks 3 young rabbis. they turned out later in life to be great rabbis. I think one of them was the Balatani I mentioned earlier, the founder of the Lubavitch Chabad movement, Shneur Zalman of Liadi. He was one of them. I think one was Yitzhak Levi of Berdichev, the Kedushas Levi, the famous rabbi from Berdichev. And one was, I forget the name of the third one, it's not so important for us. In any event, these three rabbis, young rabbis, hear what's going on, and they huddle together. And one of them says, it was the Balatanya, the Shneur Zalman of Liadi, he says, you know what, I have an idea. I know what we can do. Remember that on the outskirts of this town, there is this massive palace, a huge mansion palace, and there's a fellow that lives there that is incredibly wealthy. I mean, for him, 30,000 rubles is nothing. So we have to go to him. So his two friends say, what are you, crazy? He is a Meshumad. He's a Jew that converted to Christianity, and he hates Jews, and any Jew that tries to go to him and ask for money, he shoots them.
Oh dear.
We can't go to him. That's impossible. That's out of the question. The people in the town here would have thought of that a long time ago. And Shneur Zalman said, yeah, but that's the only possible way out of this. That has to be what we do, because there's no other way of getting money. So they say, okay, we've got to try. So they say, we're going to come with you. And he says, okay, under one condition. I do all the talking, and you guys, you keep quiet. So they go to this mansion, and they knock on the door, and this fellow opens the door. He can't believe he sees three rabbis standing there. And he screams at them. He says, are you crazy? He says, I normally shoot people like you. What are you doing here? So Shneur Zalman of Liadi says, just give us a few moments. There's a terrible tragedy. There's a young boy who was an orphan, and he just got engaged to get married, and then he was taken by the mayor of the town. The mayor is demanding 30,000 rubles, and if we don't give him the money, this boy will not get out of jail, he won't get married, his life will be ruined, his bride's life will be ruined, it'll be terrible for so many people, his parents will die in misery. Anyway, this rabbi is laying it on really thick. And after about 10 minutes, just giving him the biggest sob story on the planet, the guy said, okay. He says, wait here for a second. And he goes across the room, and there's a big desk, huge desk, and there's a drawer on top. And he opens the drawer, and he pulls out a old, rusted, filthy coin. Not even a ruble, a kopeck, whatever it is, a penny. And he throws it to the rabbi. And the two comrades, his two friends, they were so upset, they wanted to scream. What are you insulting us? You're throwing us a penny? And he said, don't forget, I do all the talking, you guys quiet. So what did he do? The Balatanya, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, he picked up the coin off the floor, and he thanked this guy profusely. He says, thank you so much. This is so kind of you. It is so wonderful of you. I can't express to you how wonderful this is, how helpful this is. You can't imagine what a wonderful thing you've done. And he lays it on uber thick about what this guy did that was so incredible and so wonderful and so tremendous and so generous. And then after 10 minutes of this, he says, but you know what? We need 30,000 rubles. And he goes into the whole sob story again. This poor boy, he's an orphan, he's going to get married supposedly next week. And he goes on and on and on. Okay. And the fellow goes to the drawer and he picks up another coin, throws it to the rabbi. Now the two friends were fit to be tied. And they were about to leap and attack this guy. You have cruel and insulting and terrible. What are you doing? You're mocking us. And Shneur Zalman said, and he does the same thing. He thanks him profusely. It's so kind, it's so generous, it's so wonderful what you've done. I can't thank you enough. And he goes on and on and on. But we need 30,000 rubles. So the next time the guy goes into the room, he doesn't throw a penny, he now throws a dime. And then after another 20 minutes, he throws $1. And then another 20 minutes, he throws $100. Anyway, you know what happened at the end. After this goes on for a long time, they get the 30,000 rubles. So they take the bag of money and they bring it to the mayor. The mayor can't believe it. He's got his 30,000 rubles. He releases the boy and they go to the wedding. There's going to be a wonderful wedding and everyone in the town is celebrating and they're so happy and they're thrilled. The mayor can't believe he's got $30,000, 30,000 rubles, so he makes himself a big party and he drinks 3 or 4 bottles of vodka and he gets really, really drunk. And in the town, they're having this amazing wedding. And at the wedding, there's a surprise guest. The Meshubit shows up. This fellow who had converted to Christianity and abandoned the Jewish community, he, I guess, felt very good about what he did. You know, it's an amazing thing that you got a guy out of jail, you can get married now, an orphan, a poor guy. He showed up at the wedding. The wedding is going on, and after getting rip-roaring drunk, the mayor gets into his wagon with all the money, got the money bags, and he whips the horses. He's not going to pay any money to St. Petersburg. He's going to go flee to somewhere else and keep the money and start his life all over again. But he's so drunk he can't drive straight. And he drives his carriage right into the bridge. And he goes flying off the carriage into the river, drowns, and he's finished. He's dead. And the collision is so powerful that the money bag goes flying and ends up at the feet of this wealthy man at the wedding. And the wealthy man picks up the money bag, and he looks at it, and he turns to the groom, and he says, you know what, this is for you. You're a couple, you take it and you make your life. Anyway, it's a cute story. But the point of the story is, now the 3 rabbis are having a post-game show huddle. And they're talking amongst the 3 of them. And the 2 rabbis want to know, how in the world did you know how to deal with that guy? How did you do that? That was magic. So he says to his friends, do you remember what happened when we first asked him for money? What he did? He said, yeah, he went to the desk and he threw you a kopeck. He said, did you look at what the kopeck looked like? It was old and dirty and rusty. He said, do you know why it was old and dirty and rusty? Don't you think other people have been here before trying to get help from this man? And you know what a pity it is that all he was able to do was to give a penny? I mean, never a guy that's so wealthy, and all he can do is give someone a penny, but that's all he was able to do. And what do you think everyone did to him? They threw it back in his face. That's what happened. No one was able to accept what he was able to do. He couldn't do more than that. And what I did was I accepted what he was able to do. And I encouraged him. And when you keep on doing that, you'll see he'll be able to give the full amount. And so the lesson here is to be patient with others and not expect of them what you expect them to be able to do. You have to understand what people are able to do doesn't always match up to what you expect of them. How many children have been ruined by parents because the children don't meet their parents' expectations? It's also crucial to overlook stereotypes, to look beyond the superficial with people, and to open yourself up to the goodness of other people. I want to share with you a famous story that's told by Rabbi Shlomo Karlbach. And the story is found in a wonderful book called Holy Brother. So they say in this story that 10 years ago, when they wrote the story, there was a woman named Chaya Adler, who was a new congregant at the synagogue of Rabbi Shlomo Karlbach. And one day, this Chaya Adler met Shlomo Karlbach near a subway station on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And after a few moments of very animated discussion, Shlomo said to her, with his his typical mischievous twinkle in his eye, "Holy Sister Chaya," that's what he called her. "I'm on my way to meet a Hasidic man who works in the Diamond District of Manhattan. If you're not busy and have the time, I'd be so honored if you would please accompany me." And Chaya looked at Shlomo in shock and surprise. "Shlomo," she said, "I would love to come along, but I don't want to offend these Hasidic men in the Diamond District. As you can see, I'm not dressed properly. I don't think my skirt is long enough." And Rabbi Shlomo said to her, "Don't worry, Sister Chaya. You have such a holy Jewish face, no one will even notice your skirt." Now, she was certain that she would encounter a sea of hostility if she ventured into this Hasidic enclave. Chaya valiantly tried to extricate herself from the expedition, but curiously, the more she explained to Rabbi Shlomo why she couldn't accompany him, the more insistent he became that she do so. Before long, Shlomo allayed Chaya's fears and she joined him on the IRT subway downtown. And as soon as Shlomo hit 47th Street, which is the Diamond Street, he was encircled by throngs of Hasidic admirers. Awkwardly, Chaya tried to stand unobtrusively to the side, but each time she made an effort to slip away unnoticed, Shlomo deliberately drew her back to his side and announced to these men, "Everybody should meet my sweetest friend, Holy Sister Chaya. Do you know that she is an outstanding Torah scholar and she learns Hasidic thought brilliantly?" And each time Shlomo made this and similar announcements to the men, Chaya thought she would die of embarrassment. She was sure the men would regard her with scorn and derision and greet Shlomo's statement with a patronizing sneer. But instead, to her amazement, they were respectful, friendly, curious, and open, and they politely inquired as to which holy book she was studying. And they were intrigued to learn that she was currently immersed in the esoteric teachings of the Ishbitzer Rebbe. Up and down 47th Street, the interactions were unexpectedly the same, positive and upbeat. Having braced herself for trouble, Chaya was not only relieved, but pleasantly surprised. Returning to the Upper West Side in a bemused and contemplative state, Chaya suddenly had an epiphany. "It was only upon my return," she said, "that I realized that Shlomo, who never wasted an opportunity to perform an act of loving kindness or impart a moral message, had deliberately choreographed the entire encounter. When he saw me near the subway, he seized the occasion to combine his visit to the Diamond District with the opportunity to deliver an important teaching. The teaching, directed both at me and the Hasidic men we met, was quite clearly the importance of letting go of conventional stereotypes. On that fateful day, both they and I learned a valuable lesson: to suspend judgment and look beyond dress and appearance for the divine spark that resides in each soul. From that day forward," Chaya said, "I began to look at Hasidim as individuals, not as stereotypes. I am equally certain that their own perception of modern Jewish women had altered perceptibly as a result of our exchange and would never quite be the same again." The Talmud tells a story about the most famous heretic in Jewish history, Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, who after his apostasy became known as Acher, the other one. They wouldn't even call him by his name anymore. And Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya had a student, Rav Meir. Rav Meir was one of the great sages of the Talmud. And what's amazing is the Talmud tells us that even after Elisha ben Abuya became a complete heretic, Rav Meir maintained a relationship with him. And he was challenged. They would say, "How do you talk with this person? How do you even study with this person? He's such a heretic." And Rav Meir said, "I ate the outer flesh of the fruit, and I spit out the pit. I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater." The truth is that our obligation in life is to model ourselves on how God deals with us. Hashem is extremely tolerant when it comes to us. And one of the most amazing svarim about understanding how God runs the world. It's a Kabbalistic sefer by Rav Moshe Cordovero called Sefer Tomer Devorah. He writes the following. At the very moment that someone is sinning against God, who is giving that sinner life, animating his limbs that are being used to rebel against God? At the very moment this person is eating away that cheeseburger on Yom Kippur, if God didn't give him energy and ability to move, he wouldn't be able to do anything. God puts up with and tolerates an immense amount from us. We can't simply dismiss others and simply write them off. Now, Rav Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of the modern state of Israel, was a role model for how to relate to Jews outside of our camp. We know that the Chalutzim that came to settle the land of Israel were often not religious and even anti-religious. But according to Rav Kook, they were doing something very important. They were resettling the land of Israel at great self-sacrifice. It wasn't so easy to go at that time and settle the land of Israel. They had even more Mesiras Nefesh, more self-sacrifice than religious Jews. And Rav Kook was able to value their contributions in the same way that Rav Meir was able to study that which was legitimate from his former teacher, Elisha ben Abuya. There was once a rabbi whose son had become a communist and a secularist, and Rav Kook encouraged this rabbi to stay close with his son. The son was raised religious, obviously, but he got carried away by the spirit of the time, Rav Kook said. And therefore he should not be considered someone that should be rejected. The boy was motivated by idealism and was dedicated to important ideals. And he wants to do good. He doesn't want to be an evil person. He wants to make the world a better place. And therefore, Rav Kook advised the father to have tolerance for his son. The truth is that Kabbalistically, everything in the world has some divine spark of holiness in it that animates it. And without that spark, it would simply cease to exist. The fact that heresy exists proves that there is something holy in the heresy itself. Our job is to try to find that spark of holiness even within those who have strayed from Judaism. The Midrash teaches something amazing. And when you look at the story of Isaac and Jacob and his two sons, Jacob and Esau, so we know there was a tremendous conflict and tension because the mother, Rebekah, favored Jacob and the father, Isaac, favored Esau. Who's going to get the blessings? It's a tremendous, amazing story. A lot of tension in the story. And we know that at the end of the story, Isaac ends up giving the blessings to Jacob. Jacob is dressed up to look like his brother Esau. But the Torah tells us an interesting detail right before Isaac gives the blessings. The Torah says, just before blessing Jacob, the Torah says, Vayarach es begodov. He smelled his clothing. He was blind. Isaac couldn't see. And he smells the clothing of Jacob, and he gives him the blessings. And the Midrash says, don't read this as begodov, clothing, but as bogdov, rebels. The Torah is telling us something amazing here. That on the basis of what does Isaac give the blessings to Jacob? They're saying here that Isaac was able to see into the future the rebels that would come out of Jacob. He was able to see those people from the descendants of Jacob who would reject Judaism, rebel against Judaism. And Isaac was able to see that these rebels are actually quite holy and quite special. And the Midrash tells us several stories of these holy rebels who at the end exhibited tremendous, when it comes down to it, inner holiness. So our job is to, even when we encounter people that have rebelled, is not to reject reject them entirely. It's to nurture that spark and channel it into a positive direction. It will only be with a lot of wisdom and humility and love that we'll be able to develop healthier relationships among all of our compatriots and constituents and fellow religionists. And I believe this is a message that's important not just for the Jewish community, but for the emerging Noahide community, to be patient with each other, to be tolerant of each other, to realize that we don't have a perfect system yet, we're working towards it, and to, on the basis of that, begin to coordinate, cooperate, at least speak with each other. We don't have to always necessarily agree with each other. Rabbi Goldberg said this a few times in the past 2 days. We need to at least speak with each other, even if we don't end up agreeing. It's not unhealthy to agree to disagree. But not to speak to each other and not to have a certain degree of respect and tolerance for others is a disaster. And I pray that, the Noahide community has a lot less baggage at this point. Whatever baggage you have, it's relatively new, and it's much easier to get into shape. And so my hope and my prayer is that this will be a lesson that will certainly be grasped by the emerging Noahide movement, and I wish all of you well. Thank you so much. And if there are questions, I forgot yesterday to do that. My wife reminded me, you didn't ask for questions yesterday. So first of all, I did bring something to hand out. I character traits, and there are wonderful, wonderful texts that deal with perfecting our character traits. There are amazing works of Musar, like the Mesilat Yesharim, the Pathways of the Upright. And this last year I taught a letter that was written by Nachmanides to his son. It's a letter of ethical spiritual guidance. It's a classic. There are people who study this letter every day before they pray. There are people who study it once a week. There are people who read it once a month. But I printed it out. I'll give it out to all of you. If you want a wonderful text to use for your own personal spiritual development in terms of working on your character traits, this is an amazing letter to go over, to think about, to meditate on, and to review. So Hashi, if you could do that, I'd be appreciative.
Where are they?
Right there on that, right there. Yeah. And if there are any questions, we have a few minutes. And if you don't have any questions, don't feel under any compulsion to come up with something.